see 2 attendees. Good. I was about to ask if there was a way for people to raise their hand, and it looks like Bruce Brown has done that. I'm not seeing a way to unmute them, though. I see a way to chat. Click. Okay, tech support, it says hover over the name in the attendee panel and click to allow talk, but nothing seems to happen when I do that. All right, I'm gonna proceed, and I'll tell you how this is supposed to work. So I'd like to welcome everyone to this experimental Zoom session of the Mira Mesa Community Planning Group Community Plan Update Advisory Committee. I'm Jeff Stevens. I'm chair of the planning group. I'll chair this meeting, but I'm only going to be here for a short time. Then I will turn it over to Alex and Gaurav. Bruce, have I managed to unmute you? It looks like I have. Can you say hello?
I just can't hear you, Jeff.
You can't hear me? I hear you.
Can you guys speak up a little bit?
I will try. You might increase the microphone, increase the volume on your machine.
How many folks do we have on?
We have 35, it looks like, plus 6 panelists. I see 2 other people.
Anybody can get on.
I see Edmund Kennedy has his hand up. Did you want to say something? No, the only one with a microphone is Bruce. All right, so let me explain how this is supposed to work. I am supposed to be able to unmute and mute people, and after the presentations, I have in mind that I will do that. But during the presentation, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll notice there is a Q&A button. Testing the Q&A box, okay. Yes, chat is disabled. In the Q&A box on the bottom, you should be able to enter questions. During the presentation, if you will put questions in there, the panelists will answer the questions after the presentations is over. So those will we'll just keep a list of those questions. They'll be saved automatically, and they'll be answered at the end of the meeting. There were a couple of questions submitted in advance. Those questions, I think, are relevant to the agenda. So rather than putting them in non-agenda public comment, I have asked the panelists to answer those questions at the end of the meeting. So that's the way it's supposed to work. We have no non-agenda public comment other than those that will be answered at the end of the meeting. Do put your questions in the Q&A box. After we're done with the questions that have been submitted during the presentation, I will attempt to allow people to ask questions. You'll do that by raising your hand, and then hopefully I will be able to unmute you. For the time being, everyone is muted except for the panelists. So go ahead and again, you can answer the questions as you need to, or add more questions as you need to, and I'm going to go on and turn this now over to Alex, who will do the next part of the meeting.
Thanks, Jeff. My name is Alex Frost. This is today's agenda. Jeff briefly kind of went over item 1 and 2. I will be talking about item number 3, and then I'll pass it on to Gaurav for item number 4, and then next steps, Q&A questions. So if you don't know, we have Jeff Stevens. He's the chair of the Mira Mesa Community Planning Group. Myself, I'm the project manager for the Mira Mesa Community Plan Update with the City of San Diego Planning Department. And with me, we have Gaurav. He's an urban designer with Dudek, our consultant. Next. So today's presentation, it's in the green box today, is a follow-up to the meeting that occurred last fall in September 16th and October 21st. We received a lot of great public input. So we're presenting the revision to the shopping center urban design concepts today. You can see the May 18th meeting will focus on a discussion related to the Miramar Gateway urban design concepts, which was postponed for March, and it's probably going to be a webinar. Another thing is, due to COVID-19, the city will have to cancel the in-person meeting, in-person community workshop planned at Mira Mesa High School on June 3rd. Instead, we'll provide an overview and officially launch the online engagement tool, which will allow you, a participant, to select their preferred urban design concepts that have been presented today and in the past. So based on that result, the planning department will prepare several land use scenarios by mid-August for further discussion. So that's the near-term agenda. A lot of things are up in the air right now, so it's tentative, but that's the plan. Next slide. I also wanted to touch briefly on what has been impacting all of us. Although San Diego region's response has been quick and decisive, as of today, there are 42 reported cases in Mira Mesa zip code 92126 and 3 reported cases in zip code 92121. It's been really difficult, and we want to thank all the frontline workers. But this is what's happening in Mira Mesa today. Next. This slide provides a big picture context and where we are in response to the global pandemic. We're still at phase 1, kind of the mobilization phase, but beginning to plan for reopening, which is phase 2. The decision on how and when we'll reopen will be made by the regional task force. I think they met today, but we'll know more later. Next. So within this context, the role of Mira Mesa Community Plan Update is to help position Mira Mesa, the community, for the long-term economic recovery and revitalization. So now I'm going to pass the baton to Gaurav for the main presentation.
Thanks, Alex. Good evening, committee members and everybody else on the call. My name is Gaurav Srivastava. I am an urban designer with Dudek, and I am helping and supporting the city on the community plan update with some urban design studies. Before I launch us into the presentation, I just wanted to call out the slide numbers that you see on the bottom left of your screens. All the slides are numbered, so in case there are slides that you want to refer to in your Q&A, you can make a note of that number and we can go back to that. What we wanted to share with you today are updated urban design concepts for two focus areas within the community plan. It's the Mira Mesa Town Center that's centered at Mira Mesa Boulevard and Camino Ruiz, and Mira Mesa Gateway, which is just west of the 15 freeway. Both focus areas are predominantly retail and commercial in nature, and they serve a significant, provide significant amenities currently to the community by way of retail and other community services. We previously shared concepts for both focus areas some months ago, and we heard your feedback, and we're back today with updated versions of these concepts. And I just wanted to quickly point out some of the themes of input that we've heard. We heard loud and clear that both these focus areas are integral to the identity as well as operations of the community. They provide services, places, and they've had a long-standing presence in the community, and that any changes that occur here have to be sensitive to the role that they currently play in the community. We also heard the need to prioritize the safety of all street users, especially people on foot, in wheelchairs, and on bicycles. We also heard the need to plan for and provide better transit connections, which would go a long way in supporting any new patterns of use that occur not just at these shopping centers, but elsewhere in the community. And finally, we engaged property owners of these shopping centers to try and understand what they have in mind for the future of their parcels, and also to try and understand what kind of flexibility they would like to have as they, in the future, if they reposition or think of providing and accommodating new uses on these parcels. And that input has also helped us understand some of the lease agreements and the constraints that those lease agreements might have on how we think about the future of these two parcels. And I'll start the discussion with the town center. And just as a general caveat to everything that you will see on these slides today is that these ideas are hypothetical, conceptual urban design studies. These are not actual development proposals. The city has no role in proposing new development. That's ultimately a decision of individual property owners and developers. So what these urban design studies are meant to show are potential realistic future change that may occur on these parcels given a certain set of development assumptions. And with a different set of development assumptions, you might end up with another scenario. For each of the two focus areas, we're presenting 3 options to share and receive input on. And over the course of the next several months, input that we hear from the community on what their preferences are with regards to these 3 options will help shape the preferred land use plan for the entire community plan update. So the town center focus area, it's about 80 acres in size. It's at the confluence of Mira Mesa Boulevard and Camino Ruiz. It currently is home to some of the most visible retail anchors in the community, including Target, Sprouts, CVS, and Vaughn's. It is adjacent to the high school and to the community park, and it really serves as a central hub for the community. It's served currently by 1 bus rapid transit line and 3 local lines. And in a previous meeting, we have shared some mobility concepts to show how improved transit connections might serve this particular location. And I'll just call out a couple. The idea of flexible lanes along Mira Mesa Boulevard and Camino Ruiz Sandag is currently studying the aerial skyway option that connects to the employment centers on the west and at the intersection of Mira Boulevard and Camino Ruiz, a new mobility hub location which would serve as a transfer location between different modes of travel. Also, based on the input we've heard from the community on the need to have safer streets, the mobility concepts have introduced a network of new bicycle infrastructure, in particular protected bicycle infrastructure, which physically separates bicyclists from fast-moving vehicular traffic. And on Mira Mesa Boulevard, that is a particularly important issue, given both the volumes and speeds on the boulevard. These are some of the proposed cross sections from the mobility presentation. If you want to refer to more of the mobility ideas, they are available on the website for the plan. So planmiramesa.org has these cross sections plus a whole bunch of other mobility ideas. And these sections I'm just including over here to illustrate, to illustrate how flex lanes might be included in the street cross section along with protected bike infrastructure. And just a quick short definition of flex lanes is these would be dedicated vehicular lanes that would accommodate higher capacity travel. So whether it's bus or a shared peak time vehicular bus lane or future-proofed for autonomous vehicles when they do become prevalent on our streets. So we're just planning at this point to accommodate that kind of new transit and mobility technology when needed. Same with a cross-section of Mira Mesa Boulevard, new proposed flex lanes along with protected bike infrastructure running along the town center, shopping center. So this is our first scenario, and this is based on the existing zoning policy that the city currently has in place for these 80 acres. It's commercial, auto-oriented commercial with some opportunities for residential. And if there's no change to that policy, we have made assumptions on where future development might occur under existing policy. And the two areas that are highlighted with the red tone on this diagram on the south, just south of Target and north of Sprouts are potentially marginal development sites that might accommodate residential and mixed uses in the future. The far majority of the focus area would continue to operate as is with the existing retail anchors retained, as well as all the surface parking that currently serves those anchors also retained. Given that the current zoning is exclusively auto-oriented, there would be no requirement on these future developments to provide any kind of open space or community benefits. And a quick calculation of hypothetical development scenario would show that there would be 0 new acres of community benefit open space. The numbers that you see of 450 units of residential and 40,000 square feet of retail are numbers that are based on 4 or 5-story mixed-use buildings, which are self-parked. So all these new developments would not rely on any parking that's currently serving the surface parking serving the current retail. All these new mixed-use developments would have their own parking, and they would be either podium or ramp. This is a bird's eye view of what that scenario might look like. So this is if you're over the high school looking west. We've called out the primary retail anchors on the slide and shown where the potential redevelopment might occur. And this is generally the scale and intensity of what the development might look like given the assumptions we have for this first scenario. And again, just to summarize, all existing retail anchors, major retail anchors retained, all existing surface parking retained, and the development that does occur is on the margins, and the footprint is constrained, and the developers are not required to provide any open space or community benefits. Moving on to our second scenario, which we're referring to as a community village. This builds off the first scenario, and goes beyond. So in this case, the existing zoning would be modified to require future developments to provide open space and other amenities so that it changes from an auto-centric development to one that is able to accommodate places and amenities for both the visitors to the shopping center, but also future residents. There are two corridors under these set of development assumptions, there are two corridors that are likely to see change. First is Camino Ruiz, just east of Target. So it builds off the redevelopment of the supermarket that's just south of Target, but it extends all the way to Mira Mesa Boulevard. And also there is a new development site at the most visible intersection currently at Mira Mesa Boulevard and Camino Ruiz. And then on the west, in addition to the redevelopment that occurs along New Salem Street at the bowling alley, this assumes potentially a new townhomes development along Reagan Road on the west. And the reason we're suggesting Reagan Roads in this scenario is that we want to use a residential typology that can mediate the transition between the single family homes on the west of Reagan Road to the new development and commercial uses that will occur on the town center site. Similarly, a couple of bird's eye views of what this may look like in the future under these assumptions. So this shows that new development, residential mixed use along Camino Ruiz, again, all self-parked, not relying on any parking that's on the surface lots. The existing retail anchors are retained along with the surface parking. What this also shows are improvements within the surface lots that would provide better pedestrian connections. And this develops on the idea of that with the enhanced zoning that is no longer auto-centric, that developers will be encouraged and required to provide improvements in the public realm that make the walking experience better and better connect key anchor destinations within the shopping centers. This is an existing photograph of Reagan Road looking south towards Mira Mesa Boulevard. So on the right, on the west side, you'll see existing single family homes, and the mall is on the left. And if one were to introduce townhomes, these would be 2-story townhomes or live work units that would help retain the residential character of Reagan Road and also serve to create a transition zone between the commercial uses that occur behind these townhomes. Moving on to scenario 3, which we're referring to as the urban village. This scenario maximizes the opportunities for future change while again retaining the existing anchors that serve the community, as well as the surface lots that serve parking lots that serve those anchors. The areas of intervention grow from the previous scenario, so the Camino Ruiz remains a corridor of future development, as well as the northwest quadrant along Reagan Road and New Salem Street. A bird's eye view of what that change might look like. So again, you'll see residential mixed use along Camino Ruiz with a new place and a cluster of plazas and potentially parks at that intersection. And again, new development along Reagan Road with improved pedestrian connections within existing surface lots to help improve the pedestrian and walk experience and walkability of the town center. We are also exploring ideas of linear parks. So you'll see a strip of green running all along Camino Ruiz. And this is again an open space amenity that will be helpful to both the future residents, if any, and visitors to the shopping center. Parking, again, as in all cases, is self-provided and does not interfere with any parking supplies for the retail anchors.
Gaurav, before you move on, could you answer just one question? These are all shown as blocks of residential, but one of your pictures showed commercial underneath. Are these all expected to be residential over commercial, or are they residential all the way up, or is that just something to be determined in the future?
It's more of the latter option. It'll be determined in the future. The building typology can accommodate retail at the bottom, commercial at the bottom, and residential above, or residential all the way up and down. It's ultimately the development program that will be feasible and a developer can pencil in that will determine the actual patterns of use. And the image that you're referring to, Jeff, the ones that show commercial at the bottom, those are the live work units along Reagan Road. And that's a different typology, and it's meant to reflect both the commercial nature of the town center, but also the proximity that it has to the adjacent residential. So it serves as a transitional use just along Reagan Road. Okay. This photograph is of Mira Mesa Boulevard on the south side, looking towards the east. The Mira Mesa Mall is on the right with Target behind these uses along the street. And one of the improvement ideas for the new open space and public realm amenities we have is to really widen the amount of space available for pedestrians. This shows a 25-foot sidewalk compared to the 6-foot sidewalk that currently exists. And this is meant to be programmed to allow a range of uses and street furniture like benches, a double row of trees, but also to serve as a buffer space between a busy arterial street, Mira Mesa Boulevard, and if any future uses occur along the boulevard. The image also shows a protected bike lane running along the street, which is one of the ideas that's embedded in our mobility concepts. All right, so I'll quickly summarize these three approaches on the same slide. So option one is based on an application of existing zoning policy. Its ability to provide open space and new amenities is limited, and its development opportunities are really along the margins, as the diagram shows. Scenario 2 and 3 extend existing zoning and would require new developments to make a concerted effort in providing community serving benefits, especially open space. And with that requirement, the footprint of intervention has to necessarily increase to allow that open space to occur. So scenario 2 focuses on Camino Ruiz and Reagan Road, while scenario 3 extends that footprint to include all four corners of the Camino Ruiz intersection and the western half along Reagan Road. Moving on to our second focus area for today's conversation. This is looking at Mira Mesa Gateway, which is about 135-acre footprint that's just east of the 15 freeway along Mira Mesa Boulevard. And again, it's primarily retail and commercial uses, with the uses that are further east, more freeway oriented given its adjacency to the freeway, with again a significant number of community serving amenities, including Smart and Final, CVS, H Mart, the cinema, Best Buy, and Seafood City. It also has a significant current asset in the Miramar Transit Center that sits just south of the study area on the Miramar College campus, and it's served by a number of bus routes, including Bus Rapid Transit. And as you see on the next few slides, one of the reasons we've selected the location for our urban design studies is really to maximize the adjacency with transit for future development. As we saw in the previous focus areas, some of our mobility concepts include flex lanes along Mira Mesa Boulevard and Westview Parkway, as well as a mobility hub location, which would be where currently the transit center is located. And this would provide opportunities for intermodal transfers between bicycles, buses, and other transit use. Again, developing on the premise that street safety for all users is very important. There is a wider and broader network of improved bicycle infrastructure, including protected bike lanes to physically separate bicyclists from vehicular traffic. A couple of cross sections, which again are available on the planmiramesa.org website, to show how flex lanes and protected bicycle infrastructure can be accommodated on streets. So in this case, Westview Parkway, on Black Mountain Road, and then on Mira Mesa Boulevard, and then Black Mountain Road. Moving on to the first option for the gateway. Similar to the previous study, the first option in this case looks at developments feasible and possible under existing zoning, which is auto-oriented. The locations we have identified for where change might occur are at the intersection of Westview Parkway primarily, so the existing Best Buy, and a couple of small footprint retail that sits south of Mira Mesa Boulevard on Westview Parkway. There is an existing park and ride facility just east of the Best Buy site, and the assumption in this hypothetical development study is any new use that occurs on that site would accommodate any park and ride parking needs. All existing retail anchors, the major ones, are retained, as well as their existing surface lots. The second option for the gateway site looks at, again, extending the current zoning to expand, to allow more community benefit, community serving open space, and therefore just requires a larger footprint for that to occur. Excuse me. We also want to emphasize the connections that these new developments might have and be served by adjacency to the park and ride facility north of Mira Mesa Boulevard and to the transit hub at Miramar College. And there is a new connection that we would like to propose and think about to make that connection a more usable connection. So that's a new pedestrian and bicycle bridge that would sit above Mira Mesa Boulevard, just south of the park and ride facility. And that would connect users of that park and ride facility to the transit center at Miramar College with a new pedestrian pathway that takes them in front of the Edwards Cinema down to Hillary and into the campus of Miramar College. The image also shows improvements that would be made for better pedestrian connections within the shopping center surface lots, with new developments, in this case, along the edges of the shopping center, so along Westview Parkway primarily. All existing retail anchors and the cinema are retained. The likelihood that a new parking structure would be required is illustrated here. That's a new parking structure that sits just to the right of Edwards Cinema in this image, to accommodate some of the lost parking that's occurring because of the developments on the parking lot. The third option for the gateway tries to maximize the future supply of public space and open space amenities, and again retains its proximity and connections to future transit. And that is important in this study because having new housing be adjacent to and served by transit goes a long way in addressing and reducing the burden that residential places on existing street networks. So having the option to use transit reduces the number, potentially reduces the number of trips, automobile trips that have to be made. In this case, we're illustrating a reconfiguration of the parking lot that sits in front of Edwards Cinema with new development along both sides of Westview Parkway. And we continue to show the option of an improved transit connection that connects the park and ride facility to the transit center on the campus. We're also, in this case, illustrating new park-like amenities that would be accommodated in this case on what is currently a surface lot. And this ties into a new policy that the city would have to have in place to require future development to provide these kinds of amenities, which currently are not required in the zoning code for this site. This is a photograph of the parking lot that sits in front of Edwards Cinema. And under this approach, one could potentially see a reconfiguration of that parking lot by retaining some of the existing retail, which is on the left, but on the right would be new mixed-use development, which in this case is illustrated as ground level retail with a similar arcade style that's currently on the site, and then above that, 3 levels of residential. And then to quickly summarize the 3 options for the gateway focus area. Option 1 is utilizing existing existing zoning code policy, and the developments are limited in their footprints and they're clustered at the intersection of Westview Parkway and Mesa Boulevard. Scenario 2 and Scenario 3 go beyond existing zoning and would require new developments to provide amenities and therefore show expanded footprints, with Scenario 3 showing the largest area of intervention. Both Scenario 2 and Scenario 3 make a deliberate effort to maximize connections to transit to help serve the future residents of this hypothetical development. And then with that, and before I hand it back to Jeff, I just want to state again that, these are just development concepts, not actual development proposals. And based on the input that we'll hear from yourselves and the community over the next few months, will help us shape preferred land use policy and urban design standards and guidelines. So anyway, thank you. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Jeff.
All right, so for anyone who didn't hear at the beginning, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you can write questions in there, that's the best way to ask a question. They got a couple of questions in advance. What I'm going to do is I will have them answer the questions that have been submitted prior to the meeting, as well as the ones that we're now seeing here at the meeting. There are only 3 that have been submitted so far. So please continue to ask questions there. After that, assuming I can get the unmute to work, there will be an opportunity for some oral questions also. So I guess I will turn it back to Alex and Gaurav to answer the questions that we have so far.
Thanks, Jeff. So the first question we received was, I'll just read it verbatim. So it was a question about density and COVID-19. So the question is, Governor Cuomo has indicated that high density is a major factor in the quick spread of COVID-19 that has caused so much devastation in New York. Assuming that the city still intends to proceed with the plans to implement high density housing in Mira Mesa, how do you justify the risk that it will impose on the residents of Mira Mesa? So it's It's a good question. So I think the quickest way to answer that is if you look at it globally, some of the major cities, extremely transit-rich places such as in Taiwan and Hong Kong, Singapore, and Seoul, South Korea, very dense and a lot of transit usage, and they've been able to curb the spread and flatten the curve. New York City obviously is one of the global epicenter now for this pandemic, and the research is showing that the quick response, especially in the West Coast cities, such as San Francisco, which is the second densest city in the US, has not experienced the kind of spread. And I think that's due to the fact that San Francisco Bay Area put shelter in place on March 15th. New York waited a week later to close their what they call a lockdown, shelter in place. So they went ahead and had St. Patrick's Day parade, festivities, people were out and about. And I think that has contributed a lot. So obviously density is a factor. But it's not the only factor. The metros with highest COVID-19 death rate in the United States is in Albany, Georgia, which is not a high density location. And this is as of today, followed by New York and New Orleans, and then Detroit and Bridgeport, Stamford, Connecticut. So it's a range. With a caveat that we're still learning and finding out more, and there's a lot of uncertainty. So that's my response at the moment. Did anyone want to add to that, or we're ready to go to the next question?
Sorry, Alex, can I just add one thing to that? And so I just want to reemphasize that we are still in the thick of it. So it's really difficult to draw out any trends or conclusions on how this might all impact places and cities in the future. But I think a few observations that we already have. So it's too early to tell the correlation with density. I think the more important factors, as Alex said, was the ability to respond effectively and in a timely manner, and the public health infrastructure that places already have plays a huge role in determining the transmissibility of the virus. We've also seen and experienced the need for additional walkable pedestrian places, especially the width of sidewalks with this physical distancing that we require to do, and how often the space that is set aside for pedestrians in the public realm is, we're now realizing, is not enough. So that may play a role in the future. The use of transit is again a big question mark. There is definitely a huge decline in transit use. And I think data in the future will really tell us how much of the transmission of this virus was along transit corridors and or not. It's just, I think it's just too early to draw any conclusions. Anyway, that was all, Alex.
Thanks, Gaurav. The second question was about parking lots and traffic and population density from John Pollard. It's a long question / comment. So his questions were related to parking structure, entrance, exit, and how it could back up. And he believed that a layered parking could work out. So essentially undergrounding it or creating a dual layer parking in some of the shopping center. That's, and the second question was traffic and population density. So adding population to a zone already traffic overloaded seem akin to firemen fighting with hoses spraying gasoline. So before any more population increases, why not first fix the traffic without removing cars? If you can't widen the roads and having elevated road is unsightly, maybe try digging layers. I believe tunneling technology should be pursued for pass-through traffic, especially from I-15 to Sorrento Valley. So I'll answer one of the questions about, well, let's start with traffic. Obviously, traffic is gone as of today, right? At the moment, there's a lot of people telecommuting now. We don't know if that trend will continue once things go back to normal, if it goes back to normal. But I believe telecommuting will be embraced a little bit more. So that could help with the traffic mitigation. Another is undergrounding or double kind of layer roads. We have looked at different intersection designs, such as undergrounding passage, but our consultant has found that there are existing utilities below Mira Mesa Boulevard. So the cost will be in tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions. So it's going to be extremely cost prohibitive. We are still exploring different approaches for traffic mitigation. So we're still working on that, but that's the initial finding that we've heard. In regards of underground parking, kind of layered parking, again, it's extremely expensive. It's about $50,000 per parking space for anything underground, I believe. And maybe Gaurav can provide more insight on that.
Sure. So yes, so Alex is right. It is the most expensive kind of parking is structured underground parking. And the plan will not require it because it's really up to the developer on what makes sense from a feasibility standpoint, what pencils out. However, if it does pencil out, the plan is not going to deny the opportunity to develop underground parking. It's just the reality that projects are a lot more difficult to develop when underground parking is mandated.
Thanks.
So let me just add to that. I think the question may have been particularly related to the last versions of these plans that you had, but the main issue was the time to get in and out of parking structures versus the shorter time it would take if you had surface parking.
Yeah, it's a understandable question, but I think ultimately it's really the design of parking, whether it's a surface lot or a structured parking, because one could argue that if you park a quarter mile away in a surface lot from your destination, as opposed to parking in a parking structure that's right adjacent to your destination, you're likely to reach your destination quicker than if you park far away. It's ultimately the physical design of these places that will determine how long access will take.
Thanks for that, Jeff. So we received another question about traffic. What is the impact of the changes proposed on eastbound Mira Mesa Boulevard during evening rush hour? That area, particularly east of Black Mountain Road, is very congested at the time, and people would be very sensitive to anything that makes it worse. Are there any improvements that could be made to improve traffic flow there? So I guess this is a follow-up to the first question, or very similar. So congestion experienced during the evening rush hour is primarily due to traffic entering a freeway and freeway ramp meter restricting the number of vehicles that can enter the freeway at a time. So the ramp meters are intended to maintain a steady traffic flow along the freeway, but that creates the backup along Mira Mesa Boulevard. We are looking for other intersection designs, but again, options like undergrounding would be very expensive. We are looking to potentially repurpose one of the travel lanes into flexible lane, and it's about moving more people rather than more cars, because that will free up space for vehicles if more people are taking, for example, transit to locations. So that's another option that is available. But I mean, it's a real concern. And again, if teleworking trend continues, I think that could be a really game changer in terms of traffic and congestion. So. Okay, so should we keep going with the questions in the Q&A, or did you want to add anything?
I know we have quite a few questions now. You can combine a couple of them if they're very similar. For example, there are 2 or 3 about what's planned for the Seafood City Shopping Center, but try to answer all of them if you can, please.
Okay, so another question was about Seafood City. So I think so. The renderings didn't show changes in all the shopping centers, and Seafood City was one of them. You didn't see any changes, and Gaurav can kind of explain why that is.
All right, yeah, I'm unmuted. For the gateway area in particular, we selected a location that we wanted to use to illustrate how proximity to transit would influence opportunities for future mixed use. And that's a connection that is really important from a policy standpoint. So which is why on these illustrations, we showed development primarily occurring just north of the Mira Transit Center. Under a different set of development assumptions, we might have included Seafood City as a potential development site. It's an aging retail facility that is likely to turn over sometime in the future. But just given the assumptions that we had today where we wanted to show transit proximity, we didn't illustrate it, which is not to say that development might not occur there in the future. Can I, sorry, Alex, I have the list of questions open, so maybe I can just go along and address the ones that pertain to physical design. Okay, so there's a question about, will there be mixed use required in residential? No, it's what ultimately gets developed will reflect the demand and programmatic realities of when the development occurs. And if there is no additional need for retail, I don't think the city will require that. Also, there is a larger trend in the retail world where existing mall-based retail is declining in demand. So we would not want to be requiring mandated retail and therefore oversupplying retail. There is a question regarding scenarios. The amount of retail space, and this is from Craig Jackson, and I'll read it out. For both areas, going from scenario 1 to 3, there is indicated to be more retail space with the reallocation of some space to residential. How the retail space can increase is unclear. Can you explain? So the development assumption is that the ground level uses in some of these redeveloped mixed-use buildings would accommodate retail. And that's the square footage that we're showing on options 1 to 3. Alex, do you want to address the safety of pedestrians and bikers going east over 15?
So the question is, what about the safety of pedestrians and bikers going east over 15? So this has come up quite a bit. So we are looking at enhancing connection and expanding kind of bikeway under the 15. There are some examples in North County where they've expanded and created a kind of protected bikeway under the freeway. So that's a consideration. And then also over the 15, where the HOA lane is, we have looked at adding to that to create a crossing directly from the transit center to Scripps Ranch. So we are definitely exploring those options.
All right. I'm going to address some of the ones that are more specific to physical design, and I'll leave the timeline and policy questions for you, Alex. So I'm just scrolling down. There's a question regarding Miramar Gateway at Greenford, and I think that's referring to the seafood opportunity. So why were there no proposed changes on the west end of Miramar Gateway at Greenford? And I think I responded to that earlier. It's like in this set of studies, we wanted to show adjacency to transit as an opportunity. And so it's not to say that there would not be future development on those locations that are further west.
So would it be simpler if I asked these questions? Because there's sort of
Sure.
here. Let me do that. So there's a general question about overcrowding in Mira Mesa and adding more density, more cars, more units. I guess the question is, why should residents support that? Why do we want this?
We have a housing crisis and a housing shortage. Obviously, everything is different today because of the global pandemic, but the long-term trend has been lack of new housing supply in San Diego and San Diego region. This has contributed to overcrowding. So I know that in a lot of Mira Mesa homes, there are 6, 7, 8 people living in single family homes. You know, to cut down on the rent cost and increasing supply, and has, you know, been studied to show to decrease potentially rent and new opportunity for people, whether young people or seniors, to live in a different type of housing in the community. So I know this is a concern, not just in Mira Mesa, but everywhere else in San Diego and California. But what we have seen historically in the last 30, 40 years is that we just have not been building enough to accommodate for the natural population growth.
Okay, so let me just follow up with that one related question. In our previous community plan, we did very detailed traffic studies that have turned out to be pretty accurate. They actually predicted some of the overcrowding we're seeing now, but we built it anyway. We haven't seen anything like that yet for this. Are you know, and there's an awful lot of magical thinking going on here. Maybe everyone will be telecommuting from now on. I mean, probably not 5 years from now. So are we going to get any real traffic studies done by real traffic engineers? And if so, on what time scale?
So this is added to the, what is the timeline for any of this to be decided or implemented? So I'll answer both Jeff's question and Nicola's question. So to do a detailed traffic study modeling requires preferred land use. So we're getting to that this fall. And to get to preferred land use, we need to implement or launch the online engagement tool. So we want to hear from, broad cross-section of the community on what kind of future they'd like to see in Mira Mesa. So based on that, we'll develop the land use, different scenarios. And then after further discussion, a preferred land use hopefully will be voted by the committee. So once we have that, Jeff, we can do a traffic modeling to see some of the impacts, potential impacts. We have already started doing a traffic modeling for a base year. So that's 2012 And then we'll do a traffic model for 2018 and then preferred land use. So we'll have different kind of scenarios to compare. So that's coming. In terms of timeline, we would hope to have a draft plan, end of the year or early next year, even just a rough working draft that the committee members can review. And then we have 1 year of EIR. That's the environmental impact report. So very detailed studies on different impacts, noise, air quality, etc. And then it still has to go to hearings, which is the Planning Commission and City Council. So that's another 6 months. So 2022, probably spring. So ultimately the City Council decides. The committee is advisory. Obviously the recommendation is extremely important as well. So that's kind of the timeline as of today.
Okay, yeah, just one more thing on that. So you do the traffic study at the very end after all the land use has been specified. If you end up with something that looks very unpleasant, what can you do to mitigate the traffic impacts at that point?
So we'll do a further mobility analysis, obviously to mitigate some of the challenges that may arise, but we'll have to ask the mobility planners and engineers for more details on that. But
okay, there's a question specifically about high density development near Mesa Woods, but I think that's the section that previously, in the last version, you did have a lot of redevelopment of the Seafood City shopping area. I don't believe you have that anymore, so I'm going to skip that for now, although you did say that could come in as a for future redevelopment area, correct?
yes.
Okay, got a question from Patty Schreibman. Says, will your analysis move beyond the specific shopping center areas and include beautification improvements throughout Mira Mesa Boulevard and Camino Ruiz to create a cohesive streetscape with pedestrian opportunities beyond these study area parcels? Will the FBA DIF include this in the update to the financing plan?
So I will answer that question. So once we get to the preferred land use, and that's when we'll start studying further connections and beautifications in streetscape, kind of the pedestrian network and connection and routes around Mira Mesa. Will the FBA DIF, so that's Facilities Benefit Assessment and Development Impact Fee. So a lot of the infrastructure in the community is paid by new development. The fee that is charged to new development, improving parks and creating new parks, transportation facility, etc. So that part of the plan comes after the EIR to assess costs and prioritize what kind of infrastructure improvements is needed. So yes, that is being planned to be implemented later in the process.
All right, just one more question on the density traffic problem. This is from Ted Brengel. He says, why the quest for higher density and what's wrong with autocentric? I believe the automobile, probably in a far different form than those of today, will be with us for a very long time. We should plan for it rather than believing that that eliminating parking spaces will somehow reduce the use of autos.
Alex,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry. So I just want to address one statement that's at the end of that question first, that none of these approaches is eliminating any parking for either existing or proposed uses. From our analysis that our traffic subconsultant did, at peak, the mall surface lots are occupied at about 3 car spaces per 1,000 square feet of retail. And all these urban design studies assume that that's the amount of parking that will be provided, whether it's retained for existing uses or proposed for new residential and or retail uses. So I just want to set that aside first, that there is no elimination of parking. And then two, whether we should only persist with an autocentric approach or revert completely to something that's not autocentric. I think it's really a balance. And these scenarios that we've drawn up try to make that balance where we're retaining the current patterns of auto use for some of the primary destinations within the shopping center. So we want to make sure that how they're currently used with their current parking patterns continues to persist. But where we do make changes, we want to acknowledge the fact that there's input we've received and expectations and stakeholders that there will be a greater emphasis on pedestrian safety, on walkability, and on creating urban environments that are conducive to that kind of activity. So in our mind, it's continuing to achieve a balance between the autocentric nature of existing use and potentially a more walkable pedestrian nature for future uses.
Okay, just one more short question on teleworking. One of the comments points out that if you're teleworking, you can do that from anywhere. So we necessarily need more density here. If someone's teleworking, they could telework from Borrego Springs or Denver or anywhere else.
So I think this goes to a national trend as well, right? So let's just assume 30% of people start teleworking. They can live wherever they want to live in the United States. Some people probably will move to lower cost of living locations. Others will move to high quality of life locations such as San Diego. You know, we have one of the best climates in the world. And we're already seeing trends of folks moving down from the Bay Area to San Diego. And the tech sector is growing more. So, and people will still need a place to live. You know, new college graduates, young professionals that may be living with their parents right now. I mean, so adding the housing supply would help with that. There's another question I saw about how will new housing lower rent? Well, the new housing types will not be affordable per se. Some of the housing projects will be required to build 10% affordable units. So there will be components where if you're making 50% of the area median income, you know, let's just say 60,000 for a family of 3, they would be able to live in some of the newer projects, newer development. You know, what we've seen in the past is what's called a filtering effect. So, you know, what was built in the 1970s, you know, premier kind of high-end luxury development is affordable apartments today. So that's what we've seen historically. So that's kind of the rationale behind it. But obviously new development, new apartments will not be affordable per se, but they will have affordable housing units as a percentage. So I answered another question, Jeff, that was in here related to that.
So here's one from John Laboth. With most of the jobs on the west end of Mira Mesa, why are we looking so hard at putting so many units on the east end? I think it would be better to move the changes to the west before looking at the east.
Yes, so we are looking at introducing potential housing in the west side, Sorrento Mesa Valley, and then in the south kind of east area of Miramar Gateway. Military shortage of military housing is a real challenge in the region. So also trying to add housing for our service men and women. So if you want to look at more of the detail, the February presentation highlights some of the proposals on the west side. Then that's at planmiramesa.org. I think that's what he meant, west side. Or is he talking about Well,
Well, he's talking about Serrano Mesa being the
Yeah.
big employment area.
yeah, we're definitely looking into that. And we've heard a lot from folks that, we should really be putting new housing really close to all the jobs. So that's definitely on the table.
All right, a question on this, on the SkyTram from, oh, this is actually same to Interstate 15. I don't believe there are any plans to put that all the way from the town center to Interstate 15, are there? It goes from there west.
Yes. So what has been studied is connecting from the Midcoast Trolley Line, the new light rail that's at UCSD. So connecting UCSD and the Boyd Station to Sorrento Mesa via Skyway. That has been studied. The city is proposing to potentially expand that from Sorrento Mesa to Mira Mesa Town Center. So its initial proposal. Our transit consultant believed there were too many restriction constraints to further expand it from Mira Mesa Mall to the Gateway, Mira Mesa Gateway 15. So there were some issues with the roads and other constraints.
Okay, so the next question has to do with the policies that will actually be in the added to the community plan. So this one is phrased to say what policies would or could be included in the community plan to ensure the provision of vertical mixed uses in the town center focus area. A more general version of that would be what sort of policies will be in the community plan that defines the uses in those areas, particularly since a lot of these things are hypotheticals at this point.
So based on the online engagement tool, let's take an example. Existing zoning, community commercial is what you have today. Let's just assume, 70% of people would prefer community village. If that's the case, wanting to see a little bit more a balance with people walking, biking, and using car and access to transit, then we would update the land use designation from community commercial to community village mixed use. Based on that, the implementation will be a new zoning, which would require some form of mixed use potentially, or have an option for the mixed use. And so that's one component of how the plan gets implemented. The second piece is urban design guidelines. So based on community input and preference for different locations, then we'll start developing urban design guidelines on the policies and approach. So that's another way to kind of ensure the creation of dynamic mixed use area. But ultimately, it's up to the property owners to redevelop if they choose to.
All right, here's a short question. Will the bicycle lanes accommodate recumbent bikes, electric bikes, and scooters?
Yes.
Okay. A question about development of Miramar Road, Pomerado Road. That's not in the community plan. I don't think you can really address that one. And then what about how to decide between plans 1, 2, and 3? I think you mentioned earlier there'll be a survey of the residents that residents can respond to. And I would presume that in addition to plans 1, 2, and 3, people will be able to comment on things they don't like about those that would like to be changed, or plan 1.5, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we'll have a online engagement tool that will highlight all the different scenarios for the focus areas presented so far. So that's in June, and we'll publicize it, and we want to have a lot of people participate. Okay.
Someone here is asking for a quick update on the housing development at the quarry. I can answer that one. The Three Roots project is moving along again. It got stalled because of some issues with their grading plan, but it's now in fairly good shape to proceed to go to the Planning Commission and City Council sometime this year. But that was before all this other chaos started, so there's no telling what that will happen with that. As far as Stone Creek goes, my understanding is that their EIR is buried under both asbestos and coronavirus, and it will be quite some time before it can get that out again. So that one is years off yet. Okay, someone comments that north arrows on the plan views would help. So in the future, can you add arrows indicating direction?
Noted, yes.
Okay. All right, I think we've answered all of the written questions. Let me see if I can do oral questions. If there are people who would like to ask questions orally, can you please raise your hand? Now, raise your hand means there should be a little item on your screen that allows you to do that. If you can do that, then I will unmute you and allow you to ask questions. Please keep them as brief as you can. First one is Aaron Barrell. I think, Aaron, you have to accept that I am unmuting you. Okay, so far this isn't working.
Hello, this is Aaron. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My question is, are you reconsidering some of the redevelopment of the surface parking lots for the land use concepts that you showed back in September and October as maybe another fourth option for us to vote on?
So this is a question about the proposal from September. We were not planning to include those proposals from September in the online engagement tool. So I guess the question answer is no at the moment.
Okay, you know, I don't see a way to mute someone here. Sorry, this is our first time with this interface, but need to mute people. Okay, now it got muted. All right. Okay, are there other questions from the audience, oral questions? Please raise your hand if you would like to. All right, I don't see any other questions.
Jeff, there are two more Q&A questions, one from Alexa and one from Ted, if you see.
Oh, go ahead and proceed. I must have missed those.
So Alexa's question about high density housing in these two areas. So we are looking at more than two areas. We are looking at all the different what we call nodes or activity hubs. So, you know, you could have a neighborhood village area and potentially, you know, north of Camino Ruiz, there's a little shopping center. I mean, that could become like a little neighborhood village. So that's a potential. And obviously these two focus areas, and then also the new villages that are being proposed along Carroll Canyon Road, Stone Creek Village, and then Three Roots is more like a neighborhood hub. So if you live close to any of those places, we're trying to create easy, pleasant, you know, public access, pedestrian connection and bike connection. So hopefully, you know, within 20 minutes, you'll be able to get to some of these places, you know, to go have a coffee or meet with your friends. At least that's the future vision. If you live along Sorrento Valley Boulevard or Calle Cristobal, yes, it's going to be more difficult to walk to any of the neighborhood kind of shopping area. So it depends. Ted, okay, public forum outside. So ultimately the advisory committee will vote on the preferred scenario, but to get to that point, we definitely want to hear from, diverse mix of Mira Masons and Sorrento Valley residents on their preference. And, we're all about public participation, and this is really democracy, at the local level. So we'd like to hear from as many people as possible and make it easy to do so. So that's why we're offering the online tool.
And so let me just add that it is the planning group that will make the formal recommendation that goes to the planning commission. So after all this is done and all the input is gathered from the public, at that point, it will go to the planning group, and the planning group will make a recommendation on whether they've done their job right or not.
Yes. Last question about the mobile homes. So we didn't show any changes there in this revision, but right now that area is affordable housing, and it is protected by certain land use overlay zone. But that does not preclude from future redevelopment. Maybe 15 years from now, 20 years from now, there may be a need to redevelop. So there isn't any specific plans, but it's with the land use update, there could be future incentive, I suppose, to redevelop.
All right, well, thank you very much. I think that's the end of our questions. I assume you'll post this presentation online like you have the other ones?
Yes, so it's recorded, so it's available to be viewed anytime after. Give us this week to post this. And again, next step, we'll have a May meeting and a June meeting where we'll launch the online tool, if I still have a job. And then in August, we'll have a land use scenarios. And then any questions or additional comments, please email me at afrost@sandiego.gov. We have more information at planmirmesa.org. So we have every presentation, some recorded, and a lot of studies that's gotten to us this point. So thanks for joining this webinar. Yeah, I'll let Jeff close this meeting.
Okay, so this is our first time doing this. I thought it went reasonably smoothly, but if you have any suggestions for making it be either smoother or more effective, please email those suggestions to me. I expect we'll be back again with another of these next ones. Am I right, Alex?
Yes. So I think we will not be meeting in person anytime soon. More webinars, and yes, let us know how to improve the process.
Okay, and what is the topic for the May meeting?
The May meeting is the discussion around the Miramar Gateway urban design concepts. That was requested by Barry Boz, and we had to postpone it from March meeting. So that's the main topic. If there's any other topic any of the committee members would like to discuss, that's the time too. So that's our next meeting.
All right, well, thank you all. We're actually right on time with ending this meeting. So thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next month.
Okay, take care.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
All right, so we're just back to the panelists now.
Yeah, it's still recording, but